Hi there. We're here today to talk about the new X-T1 Graphite Silver edition by Fujifilm. I am a Fujifilm user, as most of you who've watched my videos have seen. This kind of follows the form factor used by the Fujifilm X100. This was the camera that pretty much led off the new form factor for a new kind of mirrorless camera. They have a couple of new models. I haven't upgraded. One thing Fuji's very good about is keeping their old models still usable by firmware upgrades. Consequently, that one is still very usable and I'm still more than happy with it. I also have an X-E1 and an X-E2. I purchased the X-T1 Graphite Silver edition pretty much to just test out and see what the advantage was. The new coating is supposed to be more resilient. It is weatherproof. Of course, the X-T1 non-graphite version is also weatherproof and weather sealed. It's a bigger camera than the X-E2, and it has a couple of options that I've elected to go with that are very handy. This particular camera, I've gotten the X-T1 vertical grip for, and it has an extra battery, but even more importantly than that, this is very handy for me. I do a lot of people photography and portraiture. If you've watched my videos, you know that I like to take vertical pictures. And one of the things that it offers is in this vertical format, it has a nice handle and it has a shutter release on the top so that when you're taking a photograph, your hands fall naturally at the shutter release and the command dial with access to a couple of more buttons. So this is a very handy battery grip, very nicely made. I kind of fell in love with the vertical format in a DSLR. If you've been around cameras for a while, you'll recognize this big camera. This is a Canon 1DS. One of the nice features of the Canon 1DS was the fact that vertical or horizontal, it had shutter buttons in both places. Fuji's adopted that, and I think it's terrific. It's a very, very handy thing for vertical shooting, and I'm a strong advocate of vertical shooting. I think I've told you before, I've said before, that at least 35 to 40% of your photographs should be in the vertical format. If you look back and see what you've taken, you'll find that a lot of your favorites are in the vertical format, so I encourage you to do that. Now, this camera has a nice little flash delivered with it that pops up. I've heard that it's quite good, and it's very, very compact, very nice for that. I very rarely use on-camera flash because of the excellent high ISO shooting quality. You very rarely need to do that in my book, and I think the shots look much cleaner without it. Obviously, there are going to be times when you're going to need a flash. It's nice to have that if you don't need a full-sized flash. If you want a little flash fill, a kicker maybe with a backlit sunrise, sunset, something like that. I purchased with my X-T1 Graphite Silver Edition the Fuji 56 1.2 lens. So far, I'm very, very happy with this lens. Very nice. I'm going to put up on a screen a couple of shots I took with this. One is a couple of fishermen on the beach. My purpose in taking this was to examine the high shutter speed of the new X-T1. The new electronic shutter with a speed of 32 thousandth of a second. That's not a mistake, 32 thousandth. Most cameras have a high of 4 thousandth of a second. A few very high-end cameras have a 1/8 thousandth of a second. 32 thousandths of a second is 2 stops faster than an 8 thousandth of a second. What this is useful for primarily is in a full sunlit day. If you want shallow depth of field in a full sunlit day, you either need to use neutral density filters or a very high shutter speed. Neutral density filters are fine, but if you're like me, you use different lenses, you need a different neutral density filter for each lens. Changing them, trying to put your lens hood on after your neutral density filter is a little bit of an annoyance. Consequently, I don't have them with me very often. With the 1/32 thousandths of a second shutter speed, you don't need a neutral density filter in bright sunlight. Even if your subject is fully sunlit, you can still shoot wide open. Now this is a 1.2. Fuji also has the 35-1.4. A couple other fast lenses you can buy. So with those lenses, this fast shutter speed is very useful if you want to achieve that shallow depth of field look. Now, the photograph I'm going to show you is a couple fishermen on the beach, and they were quite a ways from me. They were 40 feet, 30 feet away from me. And as you probably know, when subjects are further away from you, it's harder to achieve that shallow depth of field. The closer they are, the easier it is. But as you can see from this photograph, this effect was pretty successful. It blurs out the background, a little blurring in the foreground. And if you look at the dog, now this is an example of the shutter speed as much as it is the lens. The new 56-1.2 lens. I took this photograph in a shaded area. Consequently, I didn't need a real fast shutter speed. And you can see it's got a very nice blurring of the body of the dog while the face is crystal clear, very sharp. So this new 56-1.2, I'm very happy with it. This comes out to be the equivalent of roughly an 84, just less than an 85 and a 35mm equivalent. And that's a very good focal length for portraiture. I commonly use an 85, used to use an 85 and a 105 and a 135 on my Nikon DSLR full frame. I find this works just as well. Very pleased with the results of this 1.2 lens. And for a 1.2 lens, it isn't outrageously expensive, which is a nice thing too. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the X-T1 Graphite Silver versus the X-E2. Now, in truth, most of what I'm going to say, maybe all of it, is relevant to the graphite and the normal X-T1. They talk about the two as being very similar with the exception of size. The frame rates are slightly higher, 8 versus 7 frames per second. There are a few other minor differences. You can see the viewfinder is a little larger. It gives you a little bit bigger window. It's a little bit faster. But the thing that I like most about the X-T1 and that would make me willing to consider buying it is the fact that ISO is a dial. I really like a dial. If you're shooting inside where you need to vary your ISOs frequently to capture the subjects that you're shooting with the highest possible definition, you'll be changing your ISOs. Doing that with a LCD screen, I'm sorry, it takes too long, it's difficult, it's distracting. With a dial, all you have to do is twist and you're there. It also has a dial to choose from your shooting mode, from single frame, high speed, low speed, or bracketing. That's a convenience, not as big to me, but it may be to some other folks. In addition, you can also, with the dial underneath the shutter speed, you can change your spot metering to multi-area metering, etc. So that is handy too, in addition to the other dials which it shares with the X-E2 and the X-E1, which is virtually identical. Speaking real quickly about the X-E1 and the X-E2, they're virtually identical. With the software upgrades, the X-E1 is almost the camera the X-E2 is. Again, Fuji, kudos to you for giving us software updates, firmware updates, to keep these cameras more current. It's nice to know if you spend that much money that Fuji cares about keeping them current. The battery pack, when you take it off, the vertical grip, same thing, makes the camera a little bit larger. Now I'm going to pick up the X-E1, which is the same size as the X-E2, because the X-E1 that I have here does not have the L bracket, which I currently use on my X-E2 and usually use. I advocate for those L brackets because here again I like to shoot vertical and put it on the tripod vertical. You can see I can put it on the tripod here or here, giving me my vertical shot. But it does make the camera a little bigger and makes these at that point very similar in size with that bracket on it. Without them, the camera is about 3/4 of the weight and just a tad smaller than the X-T1. The biggest difference is the eyepiece bulge on this camera. So there you have it. Would I spend the money for the graphite version? Again, it offers the features the X-T1 does and very little more, with the exception of that shutter speed. Now, if that 32,000th of a second shutter speed is important to you, it's worth getting. I think we'll be seeing most of the other features available on the other camera with a firmware upgrade. So there you have it. X-T1 is a very nice camera. I'm very pleased with it. I think you will be too.